sociologist by the name of Ulrich Beck, who's put forward an idea, a problematical idea in some respects, but it's catching on in sociology, of the modern world being in the situation of being a risk society. We are confronted at every turn by the possibility of being involved in accidents. He discusses pollution. He discusses critical analysis even of the capitalist system that forces many people into poverty. And he says that basically we live in a situation where we are continually at risk. He himself has made he's written a few books on this subject. I personally am a little disappointed at some of the work that he has written about. But if you take account of the idea of a risk society, and you think, for instance, and the numbers are the numbers are almost frightening in terms of the meaning, the numerical meaning here, of the tragedy that happened in Bhopal in India with the Union Carbide disaster. The people killed there were about 3,000, which is about the number that were killed in the Twin Towers. Now that's an example of a real risk society where people go to sleep in night. Nearby is a factory from which many of them earn their living, and there are not sufficient protectors. To the best of my knowledge, I know lawyers got involved there, but to the best of my knowledge, there were no whistleblowers around, neither before to warn nor after to divulge who was responsible, to the best of my knowledge. But let me go on to something that is perhaps better known. In terms of the risk society, let me take an example of an ultimate risk where one would imagine that the risk is so well known that every single possible precaution will be taken to provide the protection, and that's when you're dealing with the shuttles. Now, given the fact that there have been 3 shuttle accidents, and just over, I think, 200 American astronauts have gone into space. The one was those that blew up on the site, where 3 people were killed. The figures, I think, are pretty close to 10% of all the astronauts that have been into a situation of either being on the point of going into space or not. That's the chance of them getting killed. And here you would know that every single effort would be made to prevent any kind of disaster. And yet we know in the Challenger case, there was a political decree to go ahead with a flight under conditions where the engineers were trying to put a stop to it because of the cold. And apparently the latest tragedy, there were also those who had asked certain questions about those little tiles, both before and even during the flight, that something should be done to check it. I mention this point specifically because here we had, in the most sophisticated technology, with everybody devoted, thousands of people devoted to protecting these few people, and there were whistleblowers, but they were half-hearted whistleblowers, and not sufficient was done. And I say that because in the modern world within which we live, there is so much interconnection that we become dependent upon people with whom we have very little direct contact. Thousands of people are responsible for putting the shuttles into space. And based upon this, while I was doing the work in preparation, doing the reading for this conference, if I can just, it came to me that if Ulrich Beck wants to talk of a risk society, maybe beyond that, or the only way one can cope with a risk society, if he's correct that we are under risk continually, is if we are living also in a trust society, where we can trust people to do their basic jobs so that these kind of, from India through to the shuttles, will not occur. But beyond that we live in a trust society of knowing that if we are ever in dire danger or in dire distress, there will be those people who, because of their values, perhaps because of their law, because of the education that they've been through, perhaps because of personal experience, and because of their knowledge of the kind of stories we heard today, we have a certain trust that if something should happen to us, there will be somebody out there who will come to our aid. There will not be 38 bystanders who will be passive and in fact cruel as to the plight of this young woman who eventually died. another idea that I came up with, I then suggest, I haven't developed this at all. If anybody wants to run with it, they're welcome. But if we are going to talk of a risk society, I think there's room, and certainly what we've heard today, to talk also of a trust society. Given the fact that we have so many contacts with people with whom we, strangers that is, and we're so much exposed to the media, etc., to other people's problems, there must be some basic trust that we can reach out as human beings to each other to help when help is needed, when help is required. And then I end with the idea that we often talk of perhaps those 38 were an example at that time, and perhaps it would occur again. In fact, I think I came across the fact that in that same vicinity, a few years later, there was another incident similarly to this one in New York City, in the same vicinity, and nothing happened. We often talk of a silent majority of people who go about their daily business trying not to know. And as a person born in South Africa today, living in Israel, with the problems that the Palestinians have, I know how easy it is. Some of my best friends find it very easy not to know what is happening just across the Green Line in Palestinian area, or just down the road where the townships of the black people are. I know how easy it is to ignore, to forego, not to ask the questions, trying not to pick up the things that are there to be known. It is so very easy. And that is what characterizes perhaps the silent majority. But there will always be that small minority of people who will serve as a model and will do the right thing, if you like. Suddenly this word came to me in contradiction to the silent majority. I think we have to talk more perhaps of the salient minority, the small group of people who will do the right thing, who will place themselves at risk and will display altruistic behavior. After the Holocaust, I'm finishing now, after the Holocaust, a psychologist, colleague and friend of mine from Israel by the name of Israel Charney said that psychology has nothing to say to the world unless it can provide some kind of explanation of how did the Holocaust happen. And then later, Zygmunt Bauman, a sociologist in London, said something very similarly about sociology, is if we cannot explain how the Holocaust happened, then we basically are bankrupt in terms of our theoretical perspective. But I think there's a further factor. There was collateral effects from the Holocaust, and that is the behavior of the righteous Gentiles, the people who saved. And we don't have an explanation for that neither. And here, I think, is a further failure. As much as we need to know how could this cruelty, how could this horror take place, we have to know much better than we know now. How did the good things happen? Where did these people find the inner resources to display the altruistic behavior, which was not just at risk, but not placing themselves at risk alone, but their whole family. And the risk was not just of being arrested, it was of actually being sent together with the people that they were trying to rescue. And these things we really need to know. When I worked on the Bystander, I was very much aware of the fact that I was looking at something extremely marginal, extremely peripheral to the major concerns of social science. And it's probably still true today. However, I think that we are dealing with something that, as peripheral as it might seem, goes to the heart and the essence of human nature. And that the cry for help, whether in a novel of Camus or in real life, the cry for help going out to a single individual or to a group of individuals, it's a cry whose echo reverberates on and helps reflect and also mold the kind of society that we live in. Thank you.